At the main entrance, a memorial to those men of Worcestershire who gave their lives in the South African Wars of 1899 to 1902. We enter. Our first view is the magnificence of the nave. King John, the Bad King, is buried here. He is most famous for signing the Magna Carta in 1215. His will, the oldest known royal will in England, is kept in the cathedral library. He lived from 1166 to 1216. The choir organ, completed in 2008, has over 3,500 pipes, spanning the spaces on both sides of the choir. This is the Handel organ, built in 1667 and restored in 1981. The keyboard, bellows and casework are from a rebuild in 1774. Heraldry shown in a tapestry from the 1989 fund appeal at the entrance of the crypt. The crypt is a remnant of St. Wolstan's Cathedral, building of which began in 1084. Floor tiles in the crypt. A tombstone set into the floor. A general view within the crypt. Patient carving produced this detailed door. Returning to the cathedral, we can look at some of the embroidered prayer kneeling cushions. A memorial to Mary Hall of the island of Jamaica and of Bevere near this city died 11th April 1794. The west window. Looking from the nave into the choir. The Beauchamp tomb and effigy. But is it Sir John, 1st Baron Beauchamp and Joan Fitzworth, or Sir John Beauchamp of Powick and his wife Elizabeth Pateshull? The Jacobean font, a beautifully decorated item to the glory of God. Memorial to Richard Wolfe, Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries, Register of the English Lang of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, died 16 December 1877. The Chapel of St. George, with its memorial to the glorious dead of the Worcestershire Regiment. the Tetramorph, and the four beasts thereon. The four beasts are often interpreted as symbols for the four evangelists: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Man, Saint Matthew, indicating Jesus as the man who came to save us. Lion, Saint Mark, symbolizing Jesus as the baptizer of the Holy Spirit. Calf, Saint Luke, showing Jesus as the suffering servant who bore our sickness. Eagle, Saint John, foreshadowing the return of Jesus as King to seek his people. A tombstone from which you could take a brass rubbing to have the image available in your own home. Prince Arthur's Chantry is a chapel in the cathedral. It houses the tomb of Prince Arthur, eldest son of King Henry VII. Prince Arthur died aged 15 in 1502. I have booked a visit to the tower and start up the steps along with the guide and others. In the bell-ringing chamber, we are high enough to be looking down on the ceiling of the nave. A set of bells given in memory of Jonathan Philip Hughes, 1983 to 2005, hang in the bell-ringing chamber. This bell-ringing simulator is found in the ringing chamber, as is the mechanism for the tower clock. Out on the top of the tower, one has panoramic views of Worcester. Including the New Road County Cricket Ground just across the River Severn. Time stops for no man. We soon have to take the narrow spiral staircase back to the main cathedral. Outside, on the south side, looking at the cathedral from the herb garden. The Millennium Window comprises 21 etched images covering historical and biblical episodes in Christianity. From the towpath looking onto the west window. Not too many minutes ago, I was looking down on Worcester from the tower. It's a worthwhile visit. It has been a serene experience, and we say farewell as a canal boat makes its steady way down the River Severn.